Hey, birding friends. Today we get into a bird that a lot of people in the US are very familiar with, the northern cardinal. I grew up seeing these in my backyard almost every day, and it's even the state bird of 7 different states. It turns out that they weren't always as widespread as they are today, and as recent as 100 years ago, they may not have even been in the Chicago area. And, although they are all over much of the US today, they aren't common in other countries, and even Canada, where Shannon is from. I think we sometimes take them for granted, and forget how beautiful and striking their red color is to someone who doesn't see them every day. What is it exactly that makes them that color? Is it diet? The way they digest certain things? Shannon and John explain this to us in the episode, so you won't want to miss it. Okay, let's jump in. Welcome back, everyone. This is RJ, Amanda, and I'm with John and Shannon as always. Thank you for listening. And today we're going to talk about a bird that's a little more common to everybody. You'd see in your backyard a lot, and we're going to talk about the northern cardinal.
You don't see your cardinals in your backyard if you grew up in British Columbia.
Okay.
Which is why seeing a cardinal was one of the most exciting things I've ever seen in
Shannon,
my life.
that was your spark bird, right?
It totally,
what got you into...
totally was. It caused me to ask someone to stop a car on a very busy road so I could get out and see it.
And we've always enjoyed when people come from Africa or South America, how excited they are to see cardinals. So they really are an interesting thing. And the amazing thing is in Chicago is they actually weren't here in the 1920s. They were actually rare in the Chicago area. And so it's a bird that has a southern distribution in the North America that's gradually been moving north. And so they may show up in British Columbia eventually.
Maybe.
Yeah.
There are times now when I wish they'd be quiet.
Oh, yeah.
Us too.
Yeah. They're not as noisy as robins, or maybe not as early as robins.
Robins are perplexing to me because what is that male robin thinking they're doing at 3 a.m?
Oh, exactly.
Just waking everybody up.
I don't know.
Does your offer of assassinating our robin still stand?
But in the cardinals too, though, they'll get up and they're quite territorial, and the males, at least in the breeding season, and the males will set up their territories pretty early on. There can still be snow on the ground. I like to think of them as another one of these birds that, boy, once the weather starts to turn in the spring, they're going to start singing and setting up their territories.
Mm-hmm. And so they'll scare off other cardinals. They're territorial, and they'll look at themselves in the window actually and try to fight themselves, right?
Yeah.
They're super.
Once the hormones start going and they're looking to.
I mean, I love the way females look differently from the males. I think the females are really elegant, and they're different enough that people have trouble putting them in the same species sometimes, right? And so there are not that many pinks in birds, and female cardinals have tinged with pink. I like it.
So one of the interesting things about cardinals, too, is that the females actually sing from time to time, and that's something that's researchers are actually beginning to look at more and more as these situations where females may actually have maybe an additional role in the territoriality that once the pair is formed, than people realize. Because
most female songbirds, they don't sing, right? It's that more of a.
So that's I guess what I would say is, depending on who you're talking to, if they're interested in researching this, they would probably say, we just haven't looked very clearly.
Oh, okay.
Well, there's a difference between vocalizing to people like that and singing. So those, female birds vocalize, but the whole concept of singing, and I imagine it's a fine line between what you call some of these things, context dependent as well.
Yeah, but I think one of the neat things about cardinals is they're pretty ubiquitous across most of North America, and so because of that, people are seeing them, and then when you see a female setting up and singing, it's something you can notice.
And is their call similar? Does it sound the same as the male? I've never really differentiated the two.
So that's an interesting question in the sense that I think it sounds basically the same. It's certainly got the same framework. My guess is that if you look at the details of that song through a spectrogram, they're probably diagnosably different, and that I think the male. I would have described it as the times I've heard females singing, they don't seem to be singing quite as loudly, and I've actually feel like I've gotten to the point where every once in a while I'll hear a bird and going, I wonder if that's a female, just because it's not quite as loud or as persistent as the but I don't think we really know necessarily what the purpose is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is interesting for such a common bird.
Yeah.
Hey, John, how many cardinals do we have in the Field Museum's collections?
I'm gonna say
Pressure's on. You were off by a
1,200.
lot with.
1,200.
You're a lot closer. There's 1,336 cataloged ones.
Wow.
And 408 of them are from Illinois.
Nice.
So, but when you look at even a bird as common as cardinal, it seems like we have a lot, and we do compared to some other collections because of our salvage program. If you still wanted to look at geographic variation across sexes, across the annual cycle, including juveniles, trying to understand molt patterns, there's not enough of them in collections to do a study like that. These birds that have really broad distributions end up being really patchily sampled. And so, what sounds like a lot to people doesn't sound like a lot to biologists.
Yeah.
It's all about variation.
Yeah.
And you need to have numbers of individuals to understand variation.
And you mentioned how they weren't native to Illinois originally and kind of how they've worked their way up. What has kind of driven them to expand? I mean, is it humans or their feeders?
So that's that's a great question. So possibly it's a gradually warming climate, and they would have started a lot earlier than a lot of the concern associated with climate change. But at the same time, I think that it's very likely related, and some of it also may be land use change too. And so I think they clearly have adapted to cities, fields, agriculture, and I think that's allowed them to expand too.
Okay.
Yeah. Our friend Diane gave us a book called Slow Birding, and it's about and it's really good what we've read so far. But the author theorizes just the importance of bird feeders, because I think
good, really good point. Yeah, so that's and a lot of that's probably driven mostly by the winter. So they can survive the winter, and if that's true, then they can persist in areas.
If you get a bit of seed and the weather is a bit warmer, then it's worth risking staying, because migrating is risky. It's a very it's a time of vulnerability for death.
And cardinals are probably one of the least migratory passerines I can think of in North America in the grand scheme of things. I don't think of them as migrating. And at the same time, they do some interesting things. So I've looked out our back window, I think sometime in the late fall, and had 5 or 6 male cardinals in the yard. So clearly, when the breeding season's over, fall, winter comes, they're looking for places where they can find feed. You may get territoriality breaks down, and you may get a whole bunch of birds hanging out at least briefly in areas where there's a lot of seed. So coming back to the feeder thing, that can absolutely be a factor for them, and it's helping them survive, and they're not worried about each other at that time of year.
So whatever's happening to them at the beginning of the breeding season, when they're so territorial, even with their own image in a plate glass window, they clearly, when the breeding hormones are gone down, they don't still maintain that level of territoriality throughout the year.
I will tell you, when you're out banding birds, they're one of the most difficult birds to capture, because that bill is, once they get in a mist net and you pull them out, they know how to use that bill, and it does not feel good.
Oh gosh.
I had one bite me at the whatever that part, the fleshy part, the web between your finger and your thumb, and
yeah. So they're
and they don't let go. They don't care if you're screaming either.
Oh gosh.
You made me go in a mist net. You take me out of the mist net, I make you pay.
How do you trap them when you're going to band them? So you
these things called mist nets.
Okay.
Which are mist. They're nets that have fairly small holes. They are strung between two poles, and there's kind of pouches in the nest, and then the net itself is fine enough that the birds don't see it easily. Okay. And so when they're just doing their business, if you put the net in the right place, they'll just fly in. They fall into the little pouch. You take them out, put a band on them.
Okay. Because they're so quick, I would think it would be a tough thing to catch.
Yeah, some birds are smarter than others.
Yeah. Okay.
When it comes to avoiding missed
Cardinals
nets.
are not so much.
No, I would not. I don't think. Yeah, how smart
House
are
sparrows
Cardinals?
are the smartest I've ever seen of avoiding mist nets. They learn right away, and they're like, haha, you think you're going to capture me? It doesn't matter that I'm one of the most common birds in the world. You're not capturing me because I'm smart and I see that net and I'm going to go over it, not into it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
well, you talked about how cardinals will get like into groups and kind of in the winter, but I thought like the way that they pair up, it sounds really interesting. Like, you know, when they're breeding and how they kind of pick their partner and they pick a nest together, and it sounds like the male will go out and bring sticks back to the female and she'll put it together. Like, I thought that whole process was really interesting. And like, I don't know, don't they like present like, oh, do you want this stick? And she'll say no, and he'll drop it and bring something else. Or
I mean,
it sounded like people finding an apartment or something.
Yeah, you know, and I more and more I wonder what details we don't know about, like the ubiquity of some of those things, and whether or not you could actually have a pair where they literally didn't care about that, you know, and it's, again, it bothers me. Anthropomorphism is something I never like to try to delve into, and yet at the same time, I think those are perfect examples of where we see things happening and there may be norms. And then one of the questions I have is like, how codified is that and why? You know, is it literally that building that pair bond literally requires those birds to do that every single time? Or is it, you know, can you...
I would say it's more like, if I reject this and you get me another one, I like you.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah,
I'm going to try out your commitment to this relationship.
So
I like that.
Those are these fascinating questions where and how do you test that?
Yeah,
and it's.
So is it species specific and stereotyped, or what kind of variability is there? And most birds are not watched when they nest, and can be, for obvious reasons, really hard to find birds' nests. It's not in their best interest that you or the blue jay that's following you find their nests. This is not what their goal is, not to be noticeable on their nest. So it's you really, and collecting nests has gone out of fashion. That used to be really common in the early 1900s to collect nests, and that's where most of the nests that are in the Field Museum's collections come from, that time frame. But, you know, there's no observation of the bird building that nest. We just have the physical manifestation of a nesting attempt in a nest.
And they'll get a new nest every season, right? They never return.
No, and the one thing they'll also nest multiple times in a season.
Oh, wow.
So they can have second nestings if the first nest doesn't come through. You know, in the yard right now, seems like I see this every couple of years, is there's a male cardinal right now that's being pursued by a juvenile brown-headed cowbird. And so clearly there was a pair that had young in the neighborhood, and the nest got parasitized, and they've got a fledgling brown-headed cowbird that's traveling around. I think once the eggs hatch, the other thing that happens is as the chicks get older and fledge, then they split up with the pair, and you can get one set of birds with fledglings with the male and one with the female.
Oh, wow.
Which is a neat thing.
Oh.
And again, what the vagaries are in terms of individual variation of parents in that respect is a really fascinating thing. And cardinals you can often see the juveniles running around chasing the adults once fledglings are out there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Huh. And so how long does it take the juveniles to get that full red color if you're a male, or,
Oh, So there's another thing where Shannon was pointing out where collections can be really useful, because you begin to see that. You could lay them out by date and begin to look at some of that. I want to say that you see these funky redder birds in late fall.
Okay.
And it has to do with the molt cycles and things. And then...
Is there geographic variation in the molt cycles? Because cardinals take up a large swath of hot and not so hot environments.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think the quick answer is no, but
someone knows that. That's a knowable thing.
What would it take to change all that? That's one of the things I love about the Birds of North America, or actually it was the Birds of North America series, but it's now incorporated into the Birds of the World website that Cornell operates, is you can go in and look at that, and they'll have these annual cycles when they know it, which have when the birds are molting, when they're breeding, and when they're migrating.
Okay.
And so that's an interesting one with Cardinal, because again, they aren't migrating. So that can, if you're not doing migration, that may actually allow you to have a much more flexible molt cycle than.
I'm sure people know that. I
Yep.
just don't.
Okay. And so what gives it that bright red? I mean, we talked a little bit about colors, I think, on an earlier episode, but I'm just kind of curious. I know diet can have something to do with it.
Yeah, the reds and yellows are carotenoid pigments. So there's actual dye inside of the feathers that produce reds and yellows. And red, usually there's kind of a couple ways you can be red. You can be red because you turned a yellow fruit. So this comes from the diet, usually fruits and seeds. You can turn a yellow fruit or a yellow pigment into a red pigment. And that takes enzymatic activity and chemical reactions inside of the bird to do that. So that's a pretty energy demanding thing to turn yellow to bright red.
But so is it digesting that yellow fruit differently than a different
It's
bird
having
would?
chemical modifications to the yellow fruit that allow it to be red, and then it deposits the red in the feathers.
Oh, wow.
You can get also eating red things. Red berries can give you red. And so this is one of the rabbit holes I went down, because I knew a little bit about this, but it became really fascinating to me in the middle of the night. Some of the really interesting work that's being done, some of it's being done by a professor at Auburn named Jeff Hill, who's written a book about coloration and is well known for his work on coloration. But so the question is, what is red signal? There's variation in red. We've been part of one of our fellow graduate students was a master's student, and she asked us to rank the brightness of cardinals, for example, and then we look at mating success and other aspects, parasitization, depending on how bright you are. So, and you can do this, and now we can do it with spectrophotometers. We can actually measure the difference in brightness of the red. And so what is red signaling? Because it takes a lot of energy to turn yellow into red. So if you can do that, you're a bright male, you might be brighter, and that might signify that you're fitter than males that aren't quite as bright. And so there's two innovations, and you might signify that you have a better immune system if you're bright. So these are hypotheses that have been around for a long time. But what's new to some of this is is there a difference between red that comes from the berries that are red versus red that you synthesize? And the answer is yes.
Oh, wow.
You have more mating success if you're the male that is bright, not because you ate red things, but because you turned yellow things into red. Wow. So that is it's like an honest signal of the quality of a male. But on top of that, though, what happens is females have to make a choice, because it also turns out that the males that are brightest help the least at the nest.
Oh.
So you have to, what's happening is the female's making choice about where they're going to compromise, right, with not helping so much at the nest or being having good genes from that perspective, which is just really interesting to me, these kinds of things. And then one of the latest things that we're starting to understand is that the carotenoid work, there's the antioxidants, that carotenoids provide antioxidants, and that happens in the mitochondria. So there's a lot of energy issues that happen that's the energy part of your cell, is these organelles called mitochondria. So you really are signaling that you have good metabolic genes too, that you can turn that this red, the advanced amounts of red that are in some of these birds shows that their mitochondria are pretty good. And that means they're going to maybe get less cancers, they have better antioxidant properties, they can clean up free radicals better, all the things that antioxidants do, that birds that are brighter red may do that better. So there's lots of ways you can signal your quality, and then the female has to decide if the red is worth it.
Yeah. Wow. And it reminds me of what you've talked about before, Shannon, about just like sometimes you like pretty things. Like
That's right.
Even if they don't help around the nest.
Exactly.
That's right. And I think with cardinals, one of the interesting things is it's obviously the red on the plumage, but then there's the orange in the bill and the black in the face, and so there are these other features that may play roles too. And so again, these are complex questions to try to look into.
A lot of the work on carotenoids has been done in house finches, which have a lot of differences in red, but some of the newest work has been done in different birds that are red too. So it's not just house finches that have had these studies of red. It's completely, you look and you're saying, okay, well, it's red. So, but there's lots of different pigments that are red, and birds make red in lots of different ways as well. The genomic and genetic controls of these things, the developmental controls of
and you do occasionally get male cardinals that are yellow.
So whatever enzyme pathway turns it from yellow to red is not working in those individuals.
And does that bird have any mating success? The answer is possibly not.
And then how much? So now if they're eating from feeders and they're relying, a lot on like humans to feed them, should people be concerned about what type of feed they're putting out there? Could that have an effect on their, the way that they're coloring?
We would have to capture birds that feed. Well, we'd have to ban them and know that this is a bird that spends a lot of time at feeders, and then measure their color. That's not so easy. Yeah. But it's an interesting question for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, for instance, in the winter in southern Wisconsin, they're spending an awful lot of time hanging around the edges of cornfields. And I don't know what the carotenoid concentration is in corn, but it may not be particularly good for producing the red coloration that cardinals have. And those are
well, winter in Wisconsin is tough.
You got
for me.
I think there's a lot of corn for them to eat. So it's like,
I'm not hanging around cornfields. I'm in my house with a heating pad and several blankets.
All right. Well, I think that might be a good point to stop. We do have one mailbag question this week. So this is from Toby in Three Rivers, Michigan. He says, I love hearing mourning doves nearby, but whenever I move close enough to see them do their call, they stop talking. Are they shy? Do they think I'm a threat?
Yes.
They are shy and they think you're a threat. Mourning doves are not my favorite. I think they whine. I can't stand this sound. Stop whining. John does not like that. He doesn't mind them, but I don't know that hooing, just shut up. Go away.
See, I find it like nostalgic. I don't know. For some reason, it reminds me when I was younger, I could hear them. And whenever I hear that, it's kind of like a soothing, like reminds me of summer a little bit.
You're a better person than I am.
I mean, they aren't particularly shy. I mean, certainly the ones at our feeder have gotten very used to the fact that we're around, but
they do leave.
Well, they'll often go up at the last second, and so yeah.
But they come back.
Yeah, they're not dumb. I watched them sit at a peanut feeder and have one bird put away 42 peanuts at a single sitting, and they've got this crop that they can eventually use to grind all that up. So they're like they're very happy.
Charge an entrance fee to the backyard. That's a lot of dollars.
We were talking about cardinals liking feeders. Mourning doves clearly benefit too.
Oh, okay.
Respect. Yeah. We at the barbecue we were at on the 4th of July. Our friend Alyssa was saying, like, mourning doves, like, if you grow up in this area, it's kind of like the sound of your childhood, and it's so true.
Yeah.
Sorry,
maybe
Shannon.
that's why I don't like them, because they're not the sound of my childhood.
So have you noticed the little display flights that they do?
No.
So oftentimes when you hear them calling, that's a male displaying for a female. I'm not sure I fully understand territoriality or what constitutes that in mourning doves, because they can be pretty dense in an area, but they definitely do these display flights where they'll make a loop, and I assume the female's watching that.
I think that might be a good spot to wrap it up. John, you want to close it out?
Yeah, so the Cardinals, not a particularly great baseball organization, but other than that, they're just fine.
Some of our best friends might disagree with that.
People are turning it off.
And people who are Cubs fans should not throw stones at people who are Cardinals fans.
Yes.
But our Cub would take on that Cardinal any day.
Oh, totally. All right. Thanks, everyone,
they've both been a little bit of a loser sometimes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, everyone, for listening.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, everyone, for listening, and thank you to Earhole Studios in Chicago for hooking us up with a place to record. We thank them for their help. If you have a question for John, Shannon, Amanda, and I, feel free to send it to podcast.birdsofafeather@gmail.com. This week we discussed a bird that many people are familiar with, but next week we'll talk about a bird that is a little more unknown, the oil bird. This bird lives in caves in South America and uses echolocation to fly around at night like a bat. You won't want to miss this episode. Tune in next week to hear more. All right, thanks everyone for listening.